Motors, they're everywhere. Different capacity, different electrical configuration for different applications. Single phase, three phase, there are many type of motors, AC, DC. Hi. Recently someone asked me to explain how a part Y motor is working. As you'll see in our industry, motors come in different shapes and they for different applications, different powers and different electrical configuration. I only want to talk about the three-phase motor, star delta and part Y. Unlike the star delta, the part Y motor, it's differently configured inside. They already joined inside. The winding is already joined inside. And you have two stars. You have two individual stars. As you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have two individual stars. Because I'm not switching on a star delta anymore. So we don't need this. This is gone. I have two individual windings. If you use your multimeter and you measure between 1 and 2, two and 3, 1 and 3, you will always have two resistances because this is part Y motor and you have two windings. 4, 5, 6. How can you find out if your motor it is star delta or part Y? Normally it should be written on a batch or specification, but you measure between 4 and 6, 6 and 5 on straight line. If you have a resistance and then you check the other one, if you have a resistance but there's nothing between 1 and 4, 2 and 5 or 3 and 6, and you have resistance between 1 and 2, 2 and 3 and 3 and 1, 4 and 5, 5 and 6 and 6 and 4, it means they part Y. They part Y because you have two resistances with not touching each other. I explained to you about delta. Delta is coming like that. So you have three windings, then it's your choice. You can, if you measure as an example, between, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So between 1 and 6, you'll have a resistance. Between 2 and 4, you'll have a resistance. Between 3 and 5, you'll have a resistance. You won't have a resistance between 3 and 1. But all the time on star delta, you will have, let's say we have the southern side and the north side. So you always have a resistance between one of the north and one of the south, because that's the configuration of the delta. On a star, you'll have a resistance in a straight line. So that's the difference between the two. And I'm going to make another picture, so I really like the people to understand. So delta, like that, and like that. And the star, they got already connection inside, so they come like that. So obviously you'll always have resistance between these two. or this one. Yeah, so you have 1, 2, 3 possibilities of checking the resistance. And here you have to have here the resistance, you have to have here the resistance, you have to have here the resistance. Yeah, so that's the way you go. Now let's take this out and let's talk about part 1. So you go and you try to find what's wrong with the motor. You use your multimeter and you check the resistance between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 1. They all have to be equal. You have to have nothing between 1 and 4, 2 and 5 and 3 and 6. But you have to be careful. You can start this motor on DOL as much as you could start the delta on DOL, because what happened? You have this, and then you have L1, L2, L3, and then if you short this out like that to bring power here, they will start on DOL. It does make sense, right? Because you bring power to both in the same time. Like, because what happened when you do this, you have this part Y, you loop these two, you will loop these two, and you know, it looks like, I don't want to say what. So you have L1, L2, L3, because it's better represented in here. So actually you both, like put this way, this will be 1 and 4, 1 and 4, and then you have 2 and 5, and then you have 3 and 6. So see, and they together, and then you will energize all in the same time. That's why sometimes you can use some blades. They look like that kind of, with the holes, and then you can put them straight in here, put the screws back, and you will create a DOL. But if you want to start the part winding motor, this is the configuration, and you don't need this. You need only only 2 contactors. And if this is 60% and this is 40, I suggest that you always start the 60% first, and then the 40% second. So you start this, and this has got a timer which will activate the other one timer. So it's many seconds, yeah? Seconds later, you will activate the other one. So you start the first winding, first contactor. Very important. You have to make sure you respect the L1, the L2, and the L3, because you have to make sure, and I'm going to make this better. When you start the first winding, the motor takes one direction. If you, by mistake, don't check the rotation on the second winding, you will try to run in opposite side, and you'll blow up the circuit breaker and you'll destroy the motor. You have to make sure you respect the way you connect the motor. L1 goes to L1, L2 to L2, L3 to L3. Any other mistake, look on this one. You can try to, one winding will try to run the motor clockwise, the other one will run the motor anti-clockwise, and what will happen will be something pretty unpleasant. Let's make an overload a little bit better. If you have an overload here, have an overload, and inside you have all that gadgets. You have normal close, normal open here, and normal close. And then I have to make it a bit bigger, I'm sorry, it's just a bit bigger, I don't have space enough. Okay, so every time I'm just in front of it. So technically what happened, if you look at this overload, normal on, normal close, normal opening, the normal close will allow the contactor to run. So why do we use a normal overload? So do you see you have two overloads? Sometimes you need both windings to run, otherwise you can burn the motor, especially if it's a compressor on the, it's not a simple fan, it is a compressor, you need both windings. So the first winding kicks in and the second winding is running. Then you can run both of them through a common overload, but I suggest that you have two overloads and each of them will be connected to PLC, which is programmable logic control, and also to the contactor, which will be interlocked. So if one crash, the other one crash, but the overload will send the signal to the PLC, so tell you actually which winding created a problem. This is more advanced, we're not going to talk about this. But what do you have to know the part winding? You have, if it's 50-50, doesn't really matter which one you start. If it's 60 to 40, so you go 60 first, 60% will go 1, and 40 it goes the second stage. So this will be the first relay, and then you got more number 3. I'm sorry, this became automatically number 2. So because you're not running this as a start delta, there's enough two contactors. Contactor number 1 and contactor number 2 will do the trick. The contactor number 1 will supply power to the first. You see the circuit, it is already closed inside the compressor. That's the why it's a star. You cannot open the star. And then the second circuit is another star. So this already joined. You can't play start delta with it. It's just two windings, and then you need two contactors, and then you need a timer delay. So you have to have a delay between these two. So you start the 60% or one of the 50s, and then kicks in the other one. And this is it. You have to make sure, if by mistake, and I want you to look at this carefully, you switch these two and you put L2 here and L1 here. One winding will try to go clockwise, the other one will try to go anti-clockwise, and then you will destroy the motor. That's all I want to say. You have to be very careful with this. When you wire this, you have to respect and to check the rotation if you're not sure. And this is it. I could say it's pretty simple, but requires a little bit of attention. This is all about these motors. If you don't want to have two, you want to have only one. You say, okay, I don't care, I want to run both winding in the same time. I only will have only one contactor. In that case, you don't need all this. You can easily short circuit 1 with 4, 2 with 5, and 3 with 6, and then you have a DOL start. You have both windings starting in the same time. You know, like you have the number 1 winding and I have the number 2 winding. Then you have the power supply. By shorting them up, it means you short them up and then you go this one, and then you go this one. I know it looks bad, but kind of thing. And then you have L1, L2, L3, and then you have both of them rotating on the same direction on a DOL. That's all you have to know about this part winding. Two winding which are not interconnected to each other, so delta have like that. So if you talk about the delta, and if you don't want to put it like in a motor, delta you have 3. the way you wire them up, it's up to you. One start, unfortunately, they already connected inside the compressor. You cannot disconnect this. Do you see? So that's the part why you have two windings. You have two windings. This is the part winding rear. This is the first compressor. So you've got part winding, and then you have the start delta, and then you can either short circuit them here, which will look like one of these, you see, or if not, you can apply power in parallel, as I showed you before, the way they display into the compressor. And you can apply power here and here. That's all about start delta.